Imagine screaming for help in an empty room day after day, and the only response you get is the echo of your own voice.
Yeah, that's incredibly unsettling.
It really is. For anyone who has ever poured their heart out in prayer, like begging for a medical miracle or a financial breakthrough or just um, a tiny crumb of clarity, that deafening silence from God isn't just frustrating, it's terrifying.
Right, because it creates this profound psychological crisis. When you are operating out of the assumption of a relationship, silence is, it's rarely interpreted neutrally.
No, not at all.
We don't assume the other party is just busy, you know? We assume they have withdrawn, and when the party withdrawing is the architect of the universe, the implications are just devastating.
Absolutely devastating. And that is exactly the tension we are unpacking today. We are looking at a deeply resonant message from Pastor Art over at Crossover Community Church.
A really powerful message.
Oh, man, yeah. His final sermon titled Finding Faith in the Silence of God. So our mission for this deep dive is to explore the mechanics of that silence. Not just the theological reasons for it, but the visceral human experience of it. Like staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m., feeling completely abandoned, and trying to figure out how to survive that quiet without entirely dismantling your faith.
Exactly. And to understand how to survive it, we first have to examine why the silence is so threatening to our baseline psychology in the first place.
Right. What's happening in our heads?
Yeah, Pastor Art addresses that immediate human reaction to divine silence, which is the creeping fear that we did something wrong to cause it.
Mm.
This touches on a really well-documented psychological phenomenon known as the just world hypothesis.
Okay, I am familiar with the concept, but walk me through how that actually applies to our spiritual lives.
So the just world hypothesis is this cognitive bias where we assume that actions always have like predictable, morally fair consequences.
Okay, so good actions are rewarded, bad actions are punished.
Precisely. We desperately need the world to be predictable because predictability equals safety for our brains. So we map this psychological safety net directly onto our theology.
Oh, wow. I see where this is going.
Yeah, we develop a transactional view of the universe, basically treating God like a cosmic vending machine.
Right. You put the correct coins in, the right prayers, the consistent church attendance, the charitable giving, the moral behavior, and the specific answer you want is supposed to just drop into the tray.
Exactly. You push A4, you get the candy bar.
Right.
And the crisis occurs when the machine jams, when the coins go in, but nothing comes out. Because of that just world cognitive bias, we rarely question the existence of the machine itself, you know?
Right. We don't think the machine is broken.
No, nor do we assume the machine is operating on a schedule we just don't understand.
Yeah.
Our immediate reflex is to internalize the failure entirely.
We blame ourselves.
We do. We conclude, like, I must have put in a counterfeit coin. I am inadequate. There's some hidden flaw in me that justifies this silent treatment.
Oh, man. It is a devastating feedback loop of anxiety. You are already in pain from whatever crisis drove you to pray in the first place. And now you are carrying the secondary trauma of believing your pain is some sort of divine punishment.
Exactly. You feel isolated.
Isolated, scrutinized, and completely frozen. Which brings us to the core dilemma Pastor Art presents in the first major section of his message.
That's right, the communication problem.
Yeah. If we are paralyzed by this anxiety, assuming the silence is a punishment for our inadequacy, how are we supposed to communicate with a God we feel is actively ignoring us?
And he answers that beautifully by pointing directly to historical precedent, specifically Psalm 13. And this isn't just an abstract poem. We were talking about verses written by King David.
Okay, let's contextualize David for a moment because his biography is super critical here.
Definitely.
This is a man celebrated as being, after God's own heart. He is the quintessential hero of the faith in the biblical narrative.
He's the guy.
Right. Yet, when we read the first two verses of Psalm 13, he is not composing from a posture of peaceful, enlightened tranquility at all.
Not even close.
He writes, and I'm quoting here, "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart?"
It honestly sounds like the transcript of a panic attack.
It totally does.
It is the language of severe physiological and psychological stress. You have to remember, in the ancient Near Eastern context, the concept of a deity hiding their face was the ultimate terror.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it signified a complete withdrawal, protection, and favor, leaving the individual entirely exposed to the chaos of the world. David isn't just feeling a bit lonely here.
Right.
He's expressing a survival-level threat. He's experiencing this massive cognitive dissonance of knowing God's promises while simultaneously living a reality that seems entirely devoid of God's presence.
That makes me really reevaluate how we handle that exact same cognitive dissonance today. Because reading David's words, it feels like in our modern faith communities, we have developed a devastating habit of putting a social media filter on our theology.
Oh, that's a fascinating way to put it. Break down the mechanics of that filter. How is it operating in this context?
So think about the underlying mechanism of social media. The entire platform is built on curation. You don't post the messy, chaotic reality of your life.
Right, you hide the laundry.
Exactly. You clear a corner of your living room, you fix the lighting, you force a smile, and you apply a filter that literally alters the pixels of reality to make everything look golden, warm, and flawless.
Yeah, totally.
We have adopted this exact same behavior in our spiritual lives. We feel this immense unspoken pressure to curate our pain for God.
Wow.
We think we have to walk into a church building or enter into prayer with a serene disposition, projecting this like #blessed mentality,
No.
while underneath we are literally crumbling.
We equate reverence with emotional sanitation. We genuinely believe the divine is only accessible to the polite.
Yes, but here's the profound danger of that curation. When you put a filter on your faith, you are only allowing God to interact with the avatar you've created.
Oof, that's good.
You cannot treat a wound that you refuse to uncover. If you are continually presenting a sanitized, fake version of your life to God, you are inadvertently blocking the very healing you are desperate for, because the real, broken you is still hiding out of frame.
That is such a crucial insight. You're insulating the actual injury from the physician. And this leads directly into Pastor Art's first foundational point, which is that God can handle your honesty.
He really can.
The sheer rawness of David's accusation, like literally asking, "Will you forget me forever?" proves that the biblical model for prayer in the midst of suffering is not polite submission. It is unfiltered protest.
It's wild how counterintuitive that is to us today. We treat God like a fragile corporate boss who will fire us if we show up to the boardroom angry or confused. We think our despair is a liability.
Which is a remarkably arrogant view of the divine, if you really think about it.
Yeah.
It assumes the creator of the cosmos is easily intimidated by human emotion. Pastor Art emphasizes a brilliant distinction here. He states that there is a massive difference between running away from God because you are hurting and running to God because you are hurting.
I want to camp out on that distinction for a second, because that completely redefines the nature of faith during a crisis.
He really does.
To run away is the natural human defense mechanism, right? You touch a hot stove, you pull your hand back, you encounter a silent God, you close off your heart to protect yourself from further disappointment. It's just self-preservation.
Yes. But what David does in Psalm 13 is entirely counterinstinctual. He takes his profound sense of abandonment, his anger, and his terror, and he throws it directly at the entity he believes is responsible.
Yeah.
By demanding an answer, by screaming, "How long?" He is engaging in an act of profound, messy intimacy. Protest, in this context, is actually a mechanism of attachment.
Because you don't scream at an empty chair if you truly believe no one is sitting in it.
Precisely. The act of complaining to God assumes his ultimate sovereignty. You only demand action from someone you believe possesses the power to change your circumstances.
That makes so much sense.
So bringing your unfiltered anger to God is not a failure of faith. It is an active, desperate exercise of it. It acknowledges his authority even while questioning his methods.
Okay, I hear that, and I understand the psychological relief of taking the filter off. But I have to push back here for a minute, because this doesn't actually solve the practical reality for the person listening to this right now.
Fair point.
Let's say they do that. They drop the avatar. They scream their unfiltered, agonizing prayer. And the sky is still brass. The situation doesn't change.
Yeah.
The bank account is still overdrawn. The prodigal child is still missing. The diagnosis is still terminal. If God invites our honesty and he possesses the power to cease the pain, why the delay? How does Pastor Art address the sheer brutality of continued waiting?
He addresses it by challenging our foundational assumption of what silence actually is.
Yeah.
This is the second major movement of the sermon. We universally interpret silence as absence. If we cannot detect activity through our immediate senses, we conclude that activity has ceased. But Pastor Art introduces a powerful paradigm shift, which is that silence does not equal absence.
Silence does not equal absence.
Right. And to illustrate this, he utilizes the biological reality of a planted seed.
Oh, let's look at the mechanics of that metaphor, because it's so easy to just hear seed and think of a cute little garden. But the reality of a seed buried in the dirt is actually incredibly harsh.
It is a violent environment. When you plant a seed, you are isolating it in total darkness. You bury it under the crushing heavy weight of the soil.
Yeah.
If an observer were to look only at the surface of the dirt, they would declare that patch of ground a graveyard. The empirical data available to the naked eye suggests complete inactivity.
But biologically, the absolute opposite is true.
Right. Underneath the soil, hidden entirely from view, a complex and necessary trauma is occurring. The seed is undergoing imbibition. It is taking in water, which creates immense hydrostatic pressure.
Right.
That pressure literally forces the seed coat to violently rupture in the dark. It is torn apart so that the radical, the embryonic root, can push downward into the dark soil to establish an anchor long before anything ever pushes upward toward the light.
Because if the seed doesn't go through the silent, crushing darkness, the root system never forms.
Exactly.
And without the root system, any surface-level growth would immediately wither the moment it faced the sun or the wind.
Exactly. The underground work is the prerequisite for sustainability. Pastor Art maps this biological mechanism directly to our spiritual waiting. He highlights the massive disparity between human sight and divine vision, the difference between the microscopic view and the macroscopic view.
And we are entirely trapped in the microscopic view.
We really are.
We look at the surface of the dirt in our lives, and we only see the deprivation. We see the closed door to the career we wanted. We see the isolating pain of the unreturned phone calls. We see the days bleeding into months on the calendar.
Yeah.
And because our sensory data only registers the dirt, we assume God has abandoned the project entirely.
But the macroscopic view divine vision sees the entire ecosystem. Where we see a stubbornly closed door, divine vision sees the destructive path we are being protected from.
Wow.
Where we see agonizing, pointless waiting, divine vision sees the necessary pressure required to rupture our fragile, superficial dependencies. The silence is not a punishment. It is the environment of active cultivation.
It completely flips the narrative. It turns the waiting room into a greenhouse. The darkness isn't a tomb, it's a womb. There's a gestation happening.
That's a great way to say it.
But again, to play devil's advocate for a moment, knowing that my roots are growing doesn't make the crushing weight of the dirt any less heavy.
No, it doesn't.
The cognitive dissonance is still agonizing. So how do we actually survive the daily surface-level friction of the weight without our minds completely broken down?
That is the ultimate test of resilience. And to find the mechanism for surviving that friction, Pastor Art takes us back to the text of Psalm 13, looking closely at how David concludes his agonizing prayer. This is the third major point of the message, trusting the character of the Father. We have to examine the profound psychological shift that occurs between verse 2 and verse 5.
It's one of the most jarring transitions in literature, honestly.
It really is.
He goes from, "Will you forget me forever," in the opening, to verse 5, where he suddenly declares, "But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation." And then verse 6, "I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me."
It is jarring.
Yeah.
And the critical context here is that the external stimuli have not changed.
Nothing happened.
Right. The text offers no indication that a messenger arrived with good news or that David's enemies suddenly retreated. The physical threat is identical in verse 5 to what it was in verse 1. The silence of heaven has not broken.
So how on earth does a human brain make that leap? How do you go from a panic attack to a song of praise while the gun is still to your head?
It requires a psychological technique that we would call cognitive reappraisal, specifically anchoring.
Anchoring.
Yeah. When David's present sensory data is overwhelmingly negative, when the silence is deafening and the threat is imminent, he chooses to anchor his mind to historical data. He consciously shifts his focus away from what God is currently doing, which is incomprehensible, and anchors entirely on who God has historically proven to be.
And that is the ultimate definition of faith, Pastor Art presents. He says, faith isn't knowing exactly what God is going to do. It is knowing exactly who God is.
It is the difference between a fragile, outcome-based faith and a resilient, character-based faith. If your spiritual stability is entirely dependent on God executing your preferred outcomes on your preferred timeline, your faith is built on glass.
Yeah.
The moment the vending machine jams, the glass shatters. You will abandon your beliefs the moment they fail to produce immediate utility.
Because your faith was never in God's character. Your faith was in your own desired outcome, and you were just using God as the vehicle to get it.
Precisely. But a character-based faith operates differently. It evaluates the current darkness through the lens of established historical goodness. David remembers the unfailing love that preserved him in the past.
He looks backward to look forward.
Exactly. He uses the memory of God's character as a ballast to stabilize his mind against the chaos of his current circumstances.
Which brings up a phrase from the sermon that I absolutely cannot stop thinking about. Pastor Art describes faith in these silent seasons as the stubborn refusal to walk away.
Yeah, that's a powerful line.
I love the gritty, almost defiant nature of that.
It reclaims the concept of faith from the realm of passive, serene acceptance. We often wrongly assume that a strong faith is characterized by the absence of doubt, a perpetual inner peace, and a total lack of friction.
The curated social media faith again.
Yes, exactly. But Pastor Art is arguing that true faith is highly confrontational. It is a gritty, resilient tenacity. It is standing in the middle of a barren field, feeling the crushing weight of the silence, and planting your feet. It is looking at the perceived abandonment and saying, the empirical evidence suggests I should leave, but I know the character of the architect, and therefore, I absolutely refuse to cede this ground.
It's the realization that you don't need to understand the blueprint as long as you have vetted the character of the engineer holding the blueprint.
That's a great analogy.
You don't have to like the waiting. You don't have to pretend the dirt isn't heavy. You can hate the process while still trusting the one administering it.
And that framework is incredibly liberating. It removes the burden of having to decode the silence.
Oh, that's huge.
You are no longer wasting your psychological energy trying to figure out why this is happening, which is a question that rarely yields an answer anyway. Instead, you are investing your energy into remembering who is with you in the happening.
This brings us to the sharp edge of the deep dive, the practical application. What do we actually do with this theology when we close this app and go back to our daily lives? Pastor Art delivers a very specific pastoral challenge for the listener who is currently trapped in the waiting room.
He does. The challenge is essentially a plea against premature abandonment. He urges the listener, if you are in a deeply painful chapter of waiting, do not throw away your faith because of an unfinished chapter.
Because you cannot evaluate the quality of a novel if you put it down in the middle of the dark night of the soul. The conflict in the middle of the story is the prerequisite for the resolution at the end.
Exactly. The delay in the resolution is not evidence that the author has abandoned the narrative. The silence is the space where the character is forged. So to survive the space, Pastor Art provides a clear, actionable directive.
Okay, what is it?
First, you must dismantle the avatar. You have to remove the social media filter from your prayer life.
You have to engage in the intimacy of protest. Bring the unedited draft of your anxiety to God. Tell him you are exhausted by the silence.
Right.
Tell him the waiting feels like a punishment. Express the raw, visceral reality of the dirt.
Once you have established that authentic baseline, you move to the second step, which is an exercise in intentional, vocalized surrender. You identify one specific thing, just one that you are agonizing over but possess absolutely no control over.
And you hand it over. Out loud, you pray, Lord, I don't know what you are doing, but I choose to trust you.
That sentence is a profound cognitive pivot. I don't know what you're doing. That is a radical acceptance of your own limitations and the reality of the silence.
Yeah.
But I choose to trust you. That is the stubborn refusal to walk away. It is anchoring to character when the circumstances offer no comfort. It is the modern equivalent of David's journey from how long to, but I trust.
It is the ultimate exercise of agency in a situation where you feel completely powerless. You can't control the silence, but you can control where you drop your anchor. As we wrap up this deep dive into Pastor Art's message, this leaves us with incredibly rich material to process.
It does. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over today, something that builds directly on the mechanics of that seed analogy we explored earlier.
I love the seed analogy.
We established that the dark, silent time beneath the soil is biologically necessary to build a root system capable of sustaining future growth.
Right. The pressure is the prerequisite for resilience.
Exactly. So as you sit in your own agonizing silence today, consider this question. What specific, essential trait of your character is this painful waiting actively cultivating right now?
Oh, wow.
A trait, perhaps patience, perhaps deep empathy for the suffering of others, perhaps an unshakable reliance on God instead of your own competence, that an immediate, easy answer to your prayers would have permanently short-circuited.
Wow. If the vending machine had worked perfectly on day 1, what would you have never possessed the strength to survive on day 1,000?
It forces you to look at the silence, not as the thief stealing your time, but as a crucible forging your endurance.
That is a staggering perspective shift. It reframes the most painful parts of our spiritual lives. It isn't a clean, easily diagnosed process.
No sign.
It is murky, it is heavily pressurized, and it demands that we trust the vital, unseen work happening deep beneath the surface. Drop the filter. Practice the stubborn refusal to walk away. Hand over that one uncontrollable thing today and choose to anchor yourself to the unwavering character of the Father.